Hi, my name is Ashley Costello, and my topic for this presentation is grief. So, grief usually is defined as a person's constellation of responses of bereavement. These include thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that accompany coping with and adjusting to loss. I know that everyone has gone through grief in some form or fashion throughout their life. Well, for me, there are many times that I have had to learn to grieve and go through the whole process. Throughout my lifetime, I have lost many people and animals that have been very close to me. My Aunt Joy, my Grandma Habercorn, Grandma Costello, Grandpa Costello, and Great Grandma Josie, and that is just to name a few. For animals, I have lost two dogs during my childhood, two cats, and many of my cattle because I live on a farm. While each grieving process was hard, each were different from one another in some way. After my aunt passed away, I grieved by myself. I chose to distance myself from everyone and everything that I ever cared about. Each person responds different to a loss or a hardship, and that is just how I chose to handle that certain situation. I chose this topic because I personally have grieved many times, as you just saw, and definitely in many different forms, and I wanted to raise awareness on different ways of grieving, how to help people who are grieving, and then lastly, that it's totally okay to not actually be okay. Throughout this presentation, I will be speaking about the basics on grieving and how to deal with grieving yourself and with others that are going through grief. One thing that I just said before that I would like to put a specific emphasis on is that it is okay to not be okay. So, some different ways or styles to grieve. There are 8 of them total. There is anticipatory grief, which is starting the grieving process before the death or loss actually occurs. Normal grief, which is the decrease in emotions that are expressed and the ability to show improvement and acceptance of the loss. Delayed grief is when emotions or responses are not present until a while after the loss. This occurs when people are slow to accept what actually happened. Complicated grief is normal grief, but in a more extended version. This type lasts much longer, and some people lose the ability to function properly if they're going through complicated grief. So, different ways and styles of grieving continued. There is cumulative grief, which is grief that is experienced after many losses. So, like, for example, I lost two of my grandmas and my grandpa all within 2 years, so I'm pretty sure that I actually experienced this. Masked grief is the changes in your physical and mental well-being. Changes are unable to be recognized and related to loss. So people just think that they're experiencing these changes, and they're not related to the loss, which they really are. Exaggerated grief is a more intensified version of normal grief, and it can actually lead to suicidal thoughts, overdose, and depression. Absent grief is when the loss is not recognized or acknowledged, and there's no signs of grief present. The stages of grief and how to adjust in each one. So there's 6 stages, and the first is denial, and this is trying to push through and recognize that there is grief present. The second is anger, and that is knowing that it's not okay to be okay, or that it is okay to not be okay. And you just have to sort of think of new ways to express your anger in a more healthy way. So, not like hitting stuff, but maybe like talking through your problems. The third one is bargaining, and you can adjust to this by finding support while bargaining with God. So, like going to your higher power or the person that you go to talk to that isn't actually a person. And you just kind of say, like, if I could just have another year, I'll do better, that sort of thing. Depression, you can go get help from a therapist, friends, family, anybody that can help you. The fifth stage is acceptance, and to adjust to this, you just have to find peace with the situation and with reality, and it is tough, but this is probably one of the hardest stages because it is hard to just find acceptance with something that can hurt you so bad. And the 6th stage is tear, and this stands for to accept the reality of the loss, experience what loss is going to bring for you, adjust to this new life without whatever you have actually lost, and reinvest in the new reality and find something that can, like, distract you from this. So, I actually did 2 interviews, and my first one was with my sister, Emily. She's 24 years old. She's lost 4 grandparents, an aunt, a cousin that was actually close to her age, about 3 years older, and many animals and pets, and a friend in middle school. And to cope with her losses, she actually went to grief counseling. So I asked her many questions, but I just picked a couple that I thought were helpful. The first one was, "What was your therapy and support group like?" And she responded, "Our therapy group was through Medical Associates Clinic. When we met for our meetings, we sat and talked about how our week was going and if we had any plans for the rest of the week. I think the biggest thing that the group did for me was that it made me feel like I was not alone and that I had others that were in the same boat as me." She really emphasized in this too that going to therapy and going to support groups and finding friends throughout the support group, they really helped her to feel like she belonged somewhere again. So, and then the second question that I added from her was, "What is one piece of advice you have for anybody struggling with loss?" And she said, "Never forget about them and try to push the thought of them t never forget about them or try to push the thought of them to the back of your mind. The more you think about them and see the signs of them, the more they continue to spiritually live with you and guide you and watch over you." So my second interview was with Gabe Ulrich. He is a friend and a classmate. So he is 19 years old. He lost all of his great-grandparents, a cousin that was the same age as him, and this was his senior year of high school that he lost him, and then 4 friends. The 4 friends were in the ATV accident a couple years ago. They all died at the same time. Um, he did not go to counseling or therapy, and he just kind of dealt with his own issues as he went on. I also picked 2 questions from him, and the first was, "How do you cope with loss?" And he said, "Honestly, I don't have a certain way that I get through loss. In my mind, it is sort of based on the situation. The loss of my cousin was a lot more difficult for me than when my great-grandma passed away. I think this may have just been because we were closer in age. The one thing I do to help cope is to keep the people I lost in my thoughts and prayers. My thought is that if I keep reminding myself of them, they have never fully actually passed away." And the second question that I asked him was, "On a daily basis, what is one thing that you did or said to yourself that made things a little bit better? Not made them go away, but just helped you get through the day." And he said, "One thing that I always said to myself was that other people have it way worse than me. I always tried to just think of all of the positive memories I had with the people I lost. When my cousin died, I struggled to with trying to figure out how I was supposed to go on without him. My mom told me one day that I don't have to get over it or move on from the situation. All I have to do is try and keep pushing through day by day, and eventually it would get better. She was right. All I had to do was keep living and just be grateful for everything that I did have." A summary of my presentation that I just picked out some main points that I went over, and I would like you guys to remember this. So the 8 different styles of grief are anticipatory grief, normal grief, delayed grief, complicated grief, cumulative grief, masked grief, exaggerated grief, and absent grief. There are 6 stages of grief, and they are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, and then tear. So each person's process through grief is different, and I need you guys to remember that because your mom's grief will not be the same as yours or the same as your sister's. They'll all be different. Each person is different and handles situations different. And then I'm gonna repeat this one more time. It is okay to not be okay. And then I just want to finish off with a quote that I thought was interesting. The reality is that you will never, or you will grieve forever. You will not get over the loss of a loved one. You will learn to live with it. You will heal and you will rebuild yourself around the loss you have suffered. You will be whole again, but you will never be the same. Nor should you be the same, nor would you want to. And then these are just my sources. Thank you.